Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Axe Change podcast. And today we have a special one, actually. As you can probably tell if you're watching this, it is our first video one, and we're coming to you from Fredericton. So we're not in the studio this time. We're actually coming to meet our special guest today, Francis McGuire. Francis,
Hi.
thank you for coming out today and
No
meeting me
problem.
here. So you are quite a prominent figure in Atlantic Canada. I mean, you hold a really developmental and I say beneficial role to the economy at your company here, ACOA, which is Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And can you just give us a brief description of that so we have some context setting here?
So I've been here for 18 months after 15 years in the private sector. Before that, I was Deputy Minister of Economic Development in New Brunswick. But ACOA does a whole number of things. It finances a lot of startups.
Right.
It finances expansions. It's really focused lately on two particular areas. One is labor market development, just, what do we have to do? We're now faced, for the first time in our history, with huge skill shortages at every level of our society.
Yeah.
So now we're into the people business, as well as in helping communities and or businesses expand. And so a lot of it's taken us into the new technologies, automation, robotics, analytics, where we're really trying to help people understand that they need to do this, because this is relatively new for our business communities and others. So we're in the midst of a huge cultural change, which I think so there goes my phone.
Yeah, no worries.
But,
so I want to take it back to your university days.
Yeah.
So just starting out and going from there. So you had a degree or your master's. Well, I started originally your Bachelor's of Arts from Dal.
Yeah.
Right? And then off to your studying, was it?
In Paris.
In Paris,
Right.
right. And then International Affairs in Washington, where
Yeah.
you got your master's. So I'm very curious, you did all those at the beginning of the 70s, like right in order. When you were going through that, did you have your sights set on wanting to go into politics, or like did you have a career path in mind? And like where were your motivations, or were you just kind of following a whim?
I have no idea, no plan, didn't know what I was going to do, and most of my life didn't. People kind of describe me to myself. They say the thing that really kind of drives a lot, I'm a very curious person.
Yes.
And so when I went to university, took my BA, if it was boring, I quit. I got out, did something else, and I actually have to go beg them to say, listen, I put all these things to there, would you give me a degree? And so it's just, if it's not interesting, I ain't doing it.
Yeah.
And that probably describes my life. I've had maybe 2 jobs that after 6 months I hate this, and just went out and tried something else. And most of it has been accidents. And so for those young people out there that think, gee, I have to have a plan, I never had a plan. It just kind of, okay, but I was always curious. And I'm one of these people that if you go to Disneyland, I'm always saying, well, why did they place that store here? And how do they get the merchandise up here? Some people are looking for the rides and stuff. I'm like, how's this organized?
Wondering what's going on behind the scenes.
And so that's been me in everything. That's why I love this job. I'm talking to all kinds of businesses, and it's kind of, geez, it's interesting. So I ended up getting, then I got a scholarship from France to go study European politics. I said, oh, sure, why not? With no plan. Actually went to Johns Hopkins and did international relations. That was the time of the Watergate hearings, and I was, it was the Vietnam War, so I was very anti-American, and I was thinking, well, if I'm anti-American, I should probably, I've never really spent some time there, maybe I'll go live there for 2 years, and that'll give me a sense. So that was more the motivation to it. I didn't even know that the school, which is the School of Advanced International Studies, is one of the 3 best schools in the world. I had no idea.
Really?
I was just kind of like, that sounds like a good place to go.
Because they found that out, like, that's convenient.
Well, yeah, it was. And I was dead lucky, because it's a very expensive school. But I was there because I went, I was curious, etc. And I got called in 2 months after I started by the dean. And I said, what did I do wrong? Anyway, I showed up and said, by the way, you got a full scholarship. And I said, really? How come? He said, you're the only one eligible.
You're the only one for Canada, or what?
Yeah, well, exactly. And so sometimes it's just luck, but it's kind of like I just did things I thought were going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And if I'm bored, I don't like being bored, and I just find something else.
Yeah, and I mean, I find a lot of like my peers and students and maybe millennials as a whole get very fearful. First and foremost, because they're scared they don't have a path and a clear-cut game plan, and maybe they don't have particular skills as well. But I really like how you emphasize that you don't need to have this whole kit figured out. It's more just like a curiosity, a desire to learn, which is awesome in the information age. It's so rich.
But for people, by the way, a lot of anxiety comes with that, because when you finish that and you don't know what you're going to do next, I totally sympathize with. You get very nervous, very worried, very kind of self-critical, saying what's wrong with me, etc.
Yeah.
But that's normal, and typically you get over it. But don't be surprised if that's part of your experience too, saying, what do you mean I'm graduating and I have no idea what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do things? It's part of life.
Exactly. And it is a motivator, and you show the benefit of, through the anxiety, you just keep going. And so through those first two jobs, I mean, it was only, it wasn't even 10 years between when you graduated in Washington and then started as Deputy Minister of Economic Development in New Brunswick. So, like, was that like another job you moved into in politics, and it kind of lit the light there that you wanted to follow that?
It's a story of accidents. So I started, my first job was with a bank, which I did there for a year and a half, which is excellent because I learned a lot of technical things on balance sheets and finance and stuff. Then that was in Montreal. Moved back to Nova Scotia to work for the Council of Maritime Premiers, and that was the first time I was ever exposed as a bureaucrat to what happens in the political realm, because I remember my boss, like, you'd get meetings of the three premiers that would have private conversations and stuff, and I was allowed to go in and sit. And I remember what my Emery Fanjoy, when my boss says, listen, you're privileged because you're going to listen to what really happens behind the closed doors, but you keep your mouth shut, your eyes open, and your ears open. And that's what I did. And it was fascinating, and saying, wow, so that's how things really happen. And I went from there to NBTEL, which at that time despised, hated it.
For what reasons is that?
Just a bunch of engineers, and engineers
in the early days. You're gonna build it first before it's glorious.
Yeah, to me it was it wasn't stuff. Ended up working on the Hill. Then 84, I just left there, went to work as the executive assistant to CN, because when I was in Ottawa, I was responsible politically for the Crown corporations. And when Mulroney got elected, I was fired the next month. And so ended up with, now what do I do? So I worked on the Hill for an MP, Raymond Garneau, who ran against Claude Ryan for the Liberal leadership and lost. He became president of the bank, of a bank in Quebec. Quit, and so, but I did that for a year and started working part-time for Frank McKenna as and then got talked to coming down here because of my political background as his director of communication and research, which means polling. So because I'd done a lot of, when I was a student, I worked a lot for the National Film Board. I did all those kind of like eclectic, doesn't make any sense.
You don't see the point now, but it's awesome. It
but
kind
it's
of
all
ties
experiences
together.
because it was interesting. You kind of get into, what did I learn here? Don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I need to learn, and it's got to be stuff.
To learn it.
Same when I worked on the Hill. I learned that, and so started working for Frank McKenna when he was the leader of the opposition. I came here in '85 because we thought the election would be there, and then finally the election was '87, and with Frank started out as his deputy minister of intergovernmental affairs, because I'd actually done a lot of constitutional law at SICE and stuff, so was working on the Meech Lake Accord. That didn't go so well. But one day Frank called me and said, what would you think about going to economic development? And at that point, I also had all the federal provincial agreements, which there's a lot of money, a lot of things. And I said, well, Frank, I don't know. I went home and asked my wife, said, do you think I should do that? She looked at me and said, Francis, do you think you have any choice?
Do you think you shouldn't do it?
Well, it wasn't that. The premier just asked you.
Yeah.
He was just being nice. He was just telling you, you're going to do this. So I said, oh, yeah, I guess I got it. So went into commerce and then got tourism. So did that for, well, from 87 to 98. Frank left, I left. Went to work for an IT company here. Because at that point I had to decide. I had job offers in Quebec with Canadair. Because people I knew, and so working on the new aircraft, by the way, or stay in the Maritimes. And I made a choice, because usually in life, I say to people in their careers, there's two ways to run your life. You either follow a career and then you go to wherever it takes you. So if you have to go to Chicago, or you go. Or you pick a place you want to live, and then you got to find
a career.
Find a career. And two very different approaches to life. And the first part of my life, I did the first. You know, it was like going to wherever was interesting, where there's a chance. It was Montreal, it was Ottawa, it was Halifax. The second part, by the time I got to 1998, was no, I don't want to work in Toronto. I don't want to work there. So I've got to find a job here. So worked for an IT company, which was very successful. But then those IT companies were part of MBTEL, and when they merged all the companies, there was 4 companies. Yeah. And it was pretty clear that they're going to integrate these 4, and so there's going to be a whole bunch of executives layoffs. Yeah. So I had dinner with Frank McKenna again, and said, "Geez, Frank, I better start looking for a new job." And he said, "Well, since I left, I'm the co-chair of this company called Major Drilling. They have some issues. Why don't you apply for the CEO?" I said, "Frank, well, I don't know anything about drilling." He said, "Francis, you don't know anything about tourism, call centers.
Yeah, really.
What's your problem?" I said, "Yeah, hey, you got a problem.
Makes sense.
Got a point."
Yeah.
So I went to Major Drilling, and we were there for 15 years, and we grew from $100 million to an $800 million company, and then did it for 15 years. Got tired, retired for 18 months. And then got convinced, Frank was part of that too, convinced to come back here to Ocoa. So it's kind of like, there's no clear path anywhere there. No. But it was always, why would I come back here? Well, it could be interesting. It could be some stuff. There's fun things and new directions. Yeah. So
it boils down to that it's an experience, and when there's an opportunity in front of you, you can't afford to be that picky. So I'm curious, when you stepped in back in, was it in 85 or 87 that you started with Frank?
I said 85.
85, yeah. And you started, was it tourism that you started in 87? Or what changed
no,
there?
I took, in 87, took Meech Lake.
Okay.
In 89, took over economic development.
Okay.
And in 91, tourism was added to it.
Right, I see. So, I mean, that was, like 3 decades now. So a lot has evolved in New Brunswick since then. And through the 80s and 90s was a period of a lot of growth in New Brunswick. If I'm not mistaken, I wasn't around for it, but that is when I was here. I heard it was quite prosperous. However, what was the state of matters in Atlantic Canada back then? Because, I mean, we didn't have IT. I mean, was it all energy and potatoes? What did you guys focus on there?
Again, a lot of it was accidents, and you sometimes you make a point of. I always call it like putting mines down. You don't know who's going to step on which one where, but put lots of mines. So the 2 things that really drove things was IT. For some reason, and it's funny, we were the very first people to understand the power of the internet.
Like the implications,
And I remember, and again, here's another example. Frank and I were talking about, geez, we got to do something there. And so he was giving a speech Wednesday to State of the Province, and he phoned up the evening before. He said, we've been talking about that, but we really need to focus. So we should set up a secretariat on the information highway. Okay. We've got to build the infrastructure with MBTEL. We've got to get IT companies and stuff. And so we should put a minister there to give it some focus, and we should give, some bureaucratic support, financing. And he said, "What do you think of the idea?" "I think it's brilliant." He said, "Good, because you're in charge." Click.
Yeah.
I said, "Whoa, just a minute." Like, what do you mean? Like, there's no plan here. There's no nothing. Just go out there, get that done. But that's where it started. And,
Yeah.
and I remember our ED&T was the department then. And we were the very first department in the world to use the internet as our own internal stuff. So for you guys, you can't remember the days before internet.
Yeah.
I remember the first day. Gee, what is
first day? Okay, guys, here we go.
And I still remember the first internet service provider we set up with UMB, and because we couldn't talk NBTel into doing it.
Okay.
6 months later, when NBTel saw that UMB didn't know how to do this, they stepped in and took it over.
Yeah, here, that's for
But we started that. So part of it was we're just reading the newspapers and seeing what's happening with this technology, and said there's something. And then we started financing startups. I remember those years we would spend we had a program that if you could write a business plan in IT, we'd give you $100,000, and we would be spending about $8 million a year. And I remember the controller coming up to us saying, we're just looking at stuff. You do zero follow-up on all these companies. That's terrible management. I said, no, it's not, because in startups, we know 90% are going to fail.
Yeah.
And so why follow them? We just know that's the case.
That's the odds
But
anyways.
you have to understand, we're not a venture capitalist. We're a government. And what we're really trying to do is get all these young people into these IT jobs.
Yeah, so you don't want to discriminate.
No, not that. It's more Machiavellian than that. If I get you into that, and you work there for a couple of years, now you're in the industry, which was getting people in.
Yeah.
And typically, by that time, and we're still doing that today, you've found a boyfriend, girlfriend, etc.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck here, and you're not leaving.
Building your life.
And
right.
we're building a workforce.
Yeah.
And so if you take yourself saying, I'm not a venture capitalist, but I'm building a workforce, giving people the first opportunity to go work in this field, they might start up a business and fail and start up another business, or they might be in that business but go work for another company that's more successful. And so you had a strategy, if you would, but it was, I call it flooding the backfield.
Yeah.
And just so.
With a lot of these startups, I'm curious, was it big companies like NBTel or like international corporations developing the internet? Or you said like UMB, was that just a couple like engineering students tinkering around?
Yeah.
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 So, I don't know, a lot of the startups, I mean, just curious, what would be like the age of them? Would they be like under 30, over 30, the people running these? Are they...
Typically in those days and still today, they're under 30s.
Yeah.
But not only.
Okay.
But that would be the big majority. And we still do the same thing at ACOA. We kind of, if it makes some sense, so we take fairly big risk, and we know that we're going to lose some. But the idea is to attract people into the industry, so cybersecurity these days. So that's a relatively new in importance. Yeah. So it's okay, how do we get people into that industry? Because one of the problems that the Atlantic Canada has, there are so many good jobs today. What's very different between 1991 and today? In 1991, there literally were thousands of hardworking, intelligent, well-educated people just couldn't get any kind of job.
Okay.
And so in those days was let's bring companies in, let's get startups, etc. It's radically different today.
I see.
Today there are not enough of anything. There are not enough of people working in accounting, in IT, not enough chambermaids, not enough people working in hospitals. One of the biggest shortages, one of the problems the airlines have here in terms of service, not planes. They can't get pilots.
Really?
Pilot shortages everywhere.
And so would that be for international companies?
No, for everybody.
Okay. I just meant for the pilots like Air Canada type thing.
To understand how. So JDI. So this is Jim Irving.
Yeah. Just
Jim Irving, not oil, etc. They are looking to fill in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick a total of 10,000 jobs over the next 24 months.
Are these at factories or in offices?
All over the place. They're everything from IT workers to accountants to marketing people to truck drivers to people in the Kent stores.
Okay.
It's dramatic in things like. So one of the biggest industries, and if you're in Wolfville, in Atlantic Canada, is the whole food industry. And we never thought of it in terms of start with blueberries right to potatoes, fish, aquaculture. It's one of our biggest industries, and we're getting massive investments right now going in. But so we did a review of all the big and smaller companies in agriculture. Number one issue, we thought it'd be marketing, new products, R&D, something like that. Lack of labor. Number two problem is mechanization. So I don't have labor. I've got to get robots.
Yeah.
I was up, and number three is transportation. Okay, but then you get into even robots. Well, who's going to design these? What kind of people work on these things? Or in food, one of the biggest shortages is people in quality assurance. So what's quality assurance?
Okay.
Chemistry, biology background.
Yeah.
And I tell people like that are at Acadia, the nice thing if you work for a food company and you're in quality assurance, they've got to take you on all the sales missions because people want to know about quality, etc. So that means you're going to Barcelona once a year and you party your bum right off.
Talk about that for an appealing job description.
But it is. You go to Brussels and you just, I know a couple of guys that work in that industry.
Yeah.
Like they are party animals, but they're serious.
Yeah, they're dedicated to the work. So for universities that are evidently so flush, and we have the highest concentration of universities in Atlantic Canada than the entire country, almost the continent, like how are we, like where's the struggle with retaining all these young youth looking for jobs and versus them fleeing the nest?
So everybody, business, governments do a horrible job telling people, here's some opportunities. Here's the opportunity.
Absolutely, because this is like a lot of the first time I'm hearing this.
I know.
That's the thing.
It's so like we're about to spend $1 million on an ad campaign saying, here's go into quality assurance, go into robotics, go into. If you look at Dal at Truro, they have a whole department specializing in how to mechanize agriculture.
Okay.
So there's all these kind of areas. So food is a huge area. We have big areas in defense industries, which is everything from robotics to you name it.
Yeah.
IT, like cybersecurity. Like people don't realize that IBM's world headquarters for cyber detection is Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's like their cybersecurity branch, which would be one of the biggest.
So there's two. There's encryption, which they do a lot in Waterloo, etc. But there's the detection, so their detection center of excellence. They have two. The leading one is Fredericton. The second one's in Israel.
Wow.
And so, and they are just crying to take people in.
Yeah.
And so there's that. There's JDI. There's the food industries, and take aquaculture. So we're going to get $500 million of investment on the South Shore of Newfoundland over the next 2 years, just 2 years.
Wow.
So we have two Norwegian companies coming in, putting that, plus Cook's Aquaculture.
Yeah.
People kind of think of sea cages as, you just kind of row out there, throw some stuff in. So that's not what they are. They are full of sensors.
Yeah.
So sensor technology.
It's like a petri dish almost.
It's
in the ocean.
Well, you need to measure acidity in the water, currents, temperature, and somebody's got to build these, maintain these sensors. And you look at ocean industries. So we just announced that major supercluster, and people say, "Well, what is it?" Well, it's sonars, it's acoustics, it's and a lot of the industries are simulation, because you got to train people, do things, and if you can, by the way, you would prefer never to put a person out in an oil rig and do everything remotely. So now all of a sudden, where are the technologies on communication, on remote operations, on robots on these things? And so the oil and gas industry is trying to reduce from 150 people out there to 75. But who are the technicians and the engineers and stuff are going to do that? All these jobs, people are just trying to bring them in as immigrants or trying to recruit people, and so there's all this happening. And yes, we do. Employers do a terrible job. And we're trying to tell them, why don't you go to the schools and universities and do a better job of telling people?
Yeah.
And yes, there's some jobs that being a salesperson and manager at the Kent store, which is not a bad thing to do. But there's some really interesting things.
But it seems like that's the one you hear about the most, though, is being like the manager at the Kent store.
Yeah. Which is nothing wrong, by the way. Great place to get an education.
Absolutely. I mean, and so in talking to Jerry Pond, I was asking him a lot of the same questions with the Atlantic Canadian economy. How are we going to evolve? Because, I mean, our massive boom was in IT right through the 2000s, and natural resources as well. So I asked him, how are those going to work together and where is that going to go? And he said exactly that. He was using, like, McCain's potatoes, for example. They'll use mechanization of new technologies detecting bad potatoes. And that will come from IT developed in Atlantic Canada, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Do you have data or see that happening, say with the sensors that cook aquaculture and these new aquaculture plants in Newfoundland? Are they using tech from Atlantic Canada, or is it international companies?
They use any tech from anywhere in the world, but all of these technologies still have lots of holes in them, and so they're always looking at how to fill them, etc. What do I do? So they will use any technology.
Okay.
The nice thing is that typically, McCain's has a vice president of research and development in Florenceville.
Yeah.
He spends all his time going around to see all these. So their investment, they put $5 or $6 million into Resson, which is a local company startup out of UMB that uses drones with infrared imaging, etc., to detect where outbreaks of disease are happening. So they can pinpoint it to a couple of yards. And so instead of going and spraying the whole field, they just spray that little area.
Yeah.
So they're using technology to not only have better detection, but also that way they use less chemicals.
Yeah.
And so it's cheap. So now I don't have to spray 3 acres because of 3 square yards. So they're using technology out of UMB, and it's drone imaging, infrared.
The toys they're playing with anyways, like up in the residence, right?
Yeah. Like one of the most advanced companies on analytics, robotics, etc. is Beausoleil Oysters. Go figure.
Really? Like their own R&D?
Well, their whole voyage through mechanization, data analytics, robotics, they can now, they buy from 50 farms. They have their own farms, and they can trace an oyster from the farm to the plate in Japan. Okay. Because somebody realized that an oyster is like your thumbprint. It's like every single one's different. Yep. So as they go through, if you start putting first you mechanize. Yeah. But then the second thing was, well, since they're all different, how about we put an optical eye in each one of the machines so we can trace when they get washed, when they get sorted, etc. And then where we put them in inventory, so we know exactly what we have. And that's just because we started putting an optical lens. First we mechanized, then we put optical lens to follow each one of these. And then we actually get robots to pack them. Put them in stuff because we can't find labor. Yeah. And, now we need data analytics. Yeah. And so they've got to cut propeller heads. Yeah. In the oyster industry. Yeah. This is where the world's going. Yeah. And so people would say, well, I'm not going to go work in oysters. Yeah. Guess what? It's the same thing with apples. The same thing with potatoes. Yeah. Exactly. It's the quality assurance. What you do with chemicals and stuff. These are really fascinating industrial.
I mean, don't get caught up in the product. It's not all about oysters. It's about the machines and these processes and everything
and stuff. Yeah. So I was saying that one of the things because we're not doing a good job, one thing we're doing with Mount A and then the Brunswick Business Council, and I don't know what you do with those. They're hiring a bus. They're taking 40 students, older. Young people, put them in the bus and say, we're going to drive you around to a bunch of these companies so you can see what they're doing. Yeah. It's a huge success. The kids are coming out saying, to your point, I had no idea that this is going on. Yeah. I had no idea the technology that people are using and trying to implement, et cetera, and the quality of the jobs that are here. And so we've got to do more of that, and employers have to get into. My belief is that the best thing you can do is run these bus tours in every university and take them out to companies. You just got to spend an hour or an hour and a half and see what they're doing and say, whoa, that's cool. There's a little clip, the dumb little thing with, there's a guy up here just outside of Fredericton makes drumsticks, like for drums. Yeah. And he wasn't producing very much and it was going bankrupt. And so we got him to work with the Bathurst Community College to develop a machine that would actually do this much more efficiently and make more, so that he would make 10 times more sticks. But now he's actually selling not a drumstick, he's selling 10 different kinds at different prices. His margins, you're a business student, his margins on some are really, his margins on others are,
pretty low, but
it also, his production is 10 times higher than it used to be.
Yeah.
That's a drumstick maker.
It's a drumstick
maker. Because he adopted technology. And the guys at the Bathurst Community College got a contract to build this stuff and develop it.
That's awesome.
That's the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that's the fascinating things. Good?
Right now we're running a high temp, so it keeps shutting off.
Okay. Well, just, let us know, and we can just repeat the question. So with all this growth and the sensors and Cook aquaculture and the revolutionizing of industries through tech, I'm very curious the role you guys play in that, and also more oriented in obviously entrepreneurship, but also like students and people around like the millennials, I should say, broaden it. What are your guys' activities there, and how do you scope that out and judge these?
So, there's only so much you can do. So probably 50% of what we do is financing industry to do robotics and automation, etc. Okay. So we work that in. We fund a lot of, first the incubators we fund, we fund a lot of university programs, research programs, and we fund a lot of startups as well. So that's another element. And the kind of startups are all over the map. Sometimes they're in ocean technology, sometimes they're in just an IT application, and so we will kind of finance that infrastructure, call it, and then the startups themselves. So really quite, and we're also doing things, for instance, on immigration, which we didn't used to do 18 months ago. So with immigration, because we get all the graduates in universities staying here, working, etc. We still won't have enough people, and if we can keep all the foreign students that are here, we're going to have a hard time meeting the human resource challenge. So one of the things we're doing, we're funding these study and stay programs. So we're actually picking some foreign students, saying, okay, let's take you out, let's introduce you like we do with on these bus tours to companies, see if they want to hire you early on, and give them an appreciation of what's here, so that they actually stay here. So we're spending about $1 million a year pushing those kind of they're young foreigners, because we need them all. Yeah.
A lot of these jobs, are they in cities or are they rural areas?
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
The nice thing is the labor shortages are probably just as bad in rural areas as they are in the cities. But I don't know how many employers I've talked to that just can't find enough people. In terms of why, people don't know about these things, etc. You got to understand from the employer's point of view, all this is so new. Yeah. We are going through a sociological, an immense sociological change. For 80 years we said we need employment, we don't have jobs. And only in the last 3-4 years, that's completely untrue now. Yeah. But the employer, the thought that they have to go out and really actively recruit and tell people about these things. For the employer to understand that, yes, I should automate, but I don't know how, and I'm afraid of doing it, and I don't know anybody that has, or if I have to bring in an immigrant, nobody I know has ever done this. And so there's this whole fear of the unknown, getting employers to move forward. I was saying when we got this bus tour of students at Mount A when we went to the employer saying we'd like to bring them, the employer said, love to.
Yeah.
but they never thought of doing it themselves.
Is it because before the
They've never
people
had to
come
do
to them to fill the jobs?
Exactly.
They don't need to fill their own
They've
jobs.
never had to do this before. So
Yeah.
this fundamental cultural change is the same thing with students, to say, you know, really, there's all those interesting things. What should I do to go find out?
Yeah.
Because
So
you
we
think,
need a matchmaker here. It's like-
well, sometimes it's maybe, you know, when you do it yourself, I was going to use some bad language saying, you know, you go kick in the ass.
get up on your butt and just
go
do
find it.
Yeah, it's
Because
true.
there's everybody's at fault here,
Mm.
but it's also because it's so new. This conversation we could not have 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and so that's the point, and that's where ACOA is trying to be a thought leader, saying you really have to change. You have to understand
Yeah.
and define the new problem, and it's the new problem,
Yeah.
and it's get rid of that fear and change the way you've done things for 60 years.
Mm.
That takes time, and it happens slowly.
Yeah.
It's gaining momentum. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it's I told you yesterday, I met with 14 employers, had this talk, and they all said, yes, that's our problem.
Yeah.
And all of them started to say, yeah, maybe I have to do something about recruiting. Maybe I have to do something about being immigration. Maybe I have to really look at automation. But all of which is very new to us.
Yeah, I need to scope it out. So what, like, in a broad sense, like, what role do you think students will come to play in this? And I think it'll certainly be beneficial as well with helping this process along, because students are the ones so well versed in this dynamic change.
I think what we did with Mount A is a really good example. So if I was a student union, I'd be saying, yeah, we're going to organize some bus tours and, you know, work with the local. There's lots of people that say, you know, find me 5 or 6 employers that want to do this that have interesting jobs. You'll find them very quickly. So for even a student union to think, wow, that's something I could do. Your radio show, the fact that we're talking about it, is a very important first step.
Yeah.
In saying, okay, well, how do we get ourselves organized?
Yeah.
So students have to do that, but employers have to do that.
Yeah.
But the willingness today of employers is so much different than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And why would you know that?
Yeah, exactly. And is there specific industries, just for the context of this, any students watching this, for automation, or is, I imagine it's the whole swath of things.
It's
but-
everything.
Yeah.
Like you've got Michelin down the road, you've got Scotia Gold. Did you see what we're doing in automation with Scotia Gold? Like
What-
apples? Really?
Yeah.
And just think of the quality issues they've got. Think of all the orchard operators and what they have to do to mechanize and to get efficient,
Okay.
etc. What they have to do for marketing, what they have to do for sales, how do they use social media?
Yeah.
All these things are there.
Yeah.
And it's right at your fingertips.
Right at your fingertips. And I mean, this is exactly what Jay was saying with our technology that we hold here revolutionizing traditional processes.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned when you went into major drilling, and you said it was Frank that asked you
Yeah.
to go into that. You said once again, look, Frank, I'm not qualified for this job. I have no clue about drilling. I don't do drilling. However, when I was doing a little bit of digging about this, you started there in 2000. So in 1999, the year before, they reported a net loss of $15 million. In the next 8 years, you turned it around to a net income, a net profit of $75 million. And you knew nothing about drilling. So on your level, on a personal level, what is it that made that happen?
So everywhere I go, I have a little methodology
Yeah.
that I use. It comes from a guy at Queens, Ken Wong. And there's only 3 business strategies in the world. You got to figure out which one it is and then operate that way.
Okay.
So I give you, at the McCain Institute, I give a whole morning on here's how it works. Here's how it's a methodology and how you think about business,
Yeah.
a business strategy. Don't have enough time to do it here, but I do those lectures all the time.
So back in 2008, you were voted the Atlantic Canadian CEO of the Year.
Yeah.
And then 2013, the Entrepreneur of the Year.
Yep.
So just for us watching, like, to look at the commemorable attributes of a successful man like yourself, what is it that got you those awards and got you that recognition and
Listen, I don't know. I think I come back to, I'm curious. It's
Yeah.
still right. So I like to know what people are doing. I walk in offices here, but I did everywhere. What are you doing right now? Why don't you tell me about it? And you're always surprised how much you learn by asking questions and listening.
Oh, yeah.
And I suppose, they say communication is key when you're a CEO or a leader, etc. The biggest part of communicating, though, is listening first and opening your ears and looking. I could go into, I'm not an accountant, but somebody said in the storeroom there was $1 million worth of stuff, and the pile was that big. I said, the pile should be a lot bigger. You're being robbed, or it can't be. So it's just poking around, getting out there. Yeah. So how to find a job? Get out there, go see people.
Yeah, they're there. I mean, the rest lies up to you. It seems. Yeah. So to close this, put a nice little bow on it. Is there any ending advice? I suppose that was pretty good. Sure. Or lessons from your life, or
be curious.
Be curious.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here with me, Francis.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. That was an awesome interview with Francis, and I really appreciate him making his time for me. Very insightful, to say the least, in the job market in Atlantic Canada, where we're going, strong points, the role students play, and the crucial point of innovation and making that happen. And it was our first video interview, and rightfully so. We got all the hiccups out of the way. I mean, the camera's crashing, the mics were breaking, everything was going wrong. So all in all, it was a pretty wholesome experience. We got what we came for. And once again, I am Brendan McNeil for the Axe Change podcast. I'll see you guys next time.